So the footage that you're seeing are normal pinnacle bosses. These are not Ubers yet, as I have only spent maybe in the like 2 to 3 divine budget range on this build. We're really not that expensive yet, and I've been spending most of my effort trying to fine tune the more budget version of this build so that people could at least get started on it while I work on the higher end stuff. Now this is a totem build. It's also a strength stack build, and it is abusing Vengeance Cascade. If you don't know already, the way the Vengeance Cascade works with Volcanic Fissure is that the projectiles that the fissure creates bounce on the ground once because they are returning essentially back to the fissure, thus getting pretty close to doubling our projectile damage on the Vol fissures. So because of this, I've been able to squeeze quite a bit of damage out of only a little bit of gear here. Now, historically, totem builds have always been extremely squishy. Even on strength stack builds, they've never really had a ton of defenses, and that was honestly feeling pretty bad to me when I was originally playing this character, and I thought to myself, well, it'll probably just be like a perfectionist bosser where you drop all the totems down, you just run around and dodge stuff, right? Which is fine for me. However, I decided that I wanted to try to make the build a little bit tankier. So we did a little bit of work. We made the build able to at least take a hit or two. It can't face tank things. This is still a totem build. You are meant to like not be up in the boss's face, but it's not dying at the slightest breeze that comes its way like a lot of these strength stack totem type builds do. And on top of that, with this budget level of gear, we've been able to pump out some pretty solid DPS. And after we do invest quite a bit more into here, we'll see if we can turn this into an Uber farmer and get those DPS numbers pumping. So I want to preface this by saying this is not a build guide. I just kind of want to give you the basics of how I'm scaling this build in both damage and defenses, because we're doing something a little bit weird with defenses, but it's kind of working. And as for damage, it's pretty typical strength stacking stuff. There's nothing revolutionary here by any means. So let's talk about how we're actually scaling damage first. This is pretty basic strength stacking stuff. So the idea here is that Brutus's Lead Sprinkler is the engine of this build. This is giving us 4 to 7 fire damage to attacks with this weapon per 10 strength, and we are just scaling as much strength as we possibly can. On top of that, we are using the Iron Fortress. Now, I'm using a 5 link, as I said previously, because I figured that if I wanted to keep this on a budget level of gear, probably most people wouldn't be able to afford a 6 link. It costs a couple of divines just for the 6 link. That being said, you could always hit this with like a Corrupt Beast and use Tainted Fusings to get a 6 link on this pretty easily. But the idea behind the Iron Fortress is it gives us some pretty easy access to block. It also does give us strength damage bonus, instead grants 3% increased melee physical damage per 10 strength. Now, notably, that is typically 1%, so it's giving us a tripled effect of that. Remember, boys, if you enjoy this content or this video ends up helping you out, consider liking this video to help support the channel and subscribing and hitting that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos. On top of that, we are using Crown of Eyes, which gives us increases and reductions to spell damage, also applied to attacks at 150% of their value. Now, when we combine that Crown of Eyes with Iron Will here, it is meaning that we are essentially like double, triple dipping on our strength percentage and getting a whole ton of damage. That is the main way that we're scaling damage. All of those mechanics combined and just scaling a bunch of percentage strength and a bunch of flat strength from pretty much everywhere that we possibly can. On top of that, we are using Vengeance Cascade once again. I'm just going to abuse this as much as I can this league. All the builds that can actively play with it are a little bit different from what has been normally popular recently, and it has been a pretty good notable, so we're going to abuse it as best we can. So to show you an idea of how this works, we're going to take the Earthbreaker Totem and the multi-strike support out, because I kind of just want you to see this. So the idea is that we create a fissure on the ground here, and then you'll notice that it creates a couple projectiles, and those projectiles bounce. So the whole idea here is that through my testing on most bosses, even like the smaller ones, it seems that these do all overlap, even with Blood and Sand in Blood Stance. You can see that there is only a little tiny itty bitty area in the middle where they don't overlap, and any boss that's even like this big most of the time is going to get hit by all of them. So the idea here is we're hitting with our base attack, which is the fissure itself, and then all of these projectiles, which there are 5 of them currently, and there's going to be 7 of them when we have Dying Sun up, are hitting once, and then they are bouncing because of Vengeance Cascade and hitting again, giving us some pretty crazy damage effectiveness. Every time that these 3 totems attack, they are hitting with 30 projectiles, even more than that when we get additional projectiles because of Dying Sun, as well as the basic fissures from the main attacks. So we are getting a ton of damage effectiveness with this build. That is the way that we're currently scaling damage. Other than that, we are scaling crit. We're scaling as much as we can. The base weapon has some good crit chance. There are some good melee crit nodes on the tree that we have access to, and it is about the best way that we can scale damage at the moment. So we are using things like Assassin's Mark and any crit that we can get, like crit on our flasks, a diamond flask, and etc. However, the way that we're scaling our defenses is a little bit different. So notably, the left side of the tree, when you're in the top left part of the tree, has some difficulty accessing good defenses. These days, typically you want some kind of combination of like armor and max resistances and spell suppression and all those kinds of good things. However, to get access to those most of the time, you really do need to be like very far on the right side of the tree to be able to get spell suppression, and to get maximum resistances, the build kind of has to work around that, right? Like you need to be in like this area, you need to be up here in this area, and although we've stretched up to here, it is a lot of points invested to be able to get to these maximum resistances here. So while I did toy with that idea for a little bit, I figured that maybe we should try to do something a little bit different. So what we have decided to go with is we have decided to go with Strength of Blood. So the thing about this node is that to make this node effective, you need to be currently leeching. So to be able to be currently leeching, you need some source of overleech, meaning that you're either going to have to be like a Slayer, you're going to have to use Petrified Blood, which is what we're doing, or some of the weird other mechanics that you can have in the game. So the whole idea here is that because the Chieftain does have access to this node here, which gives us 2% of damage dealt by your totems is leached to his life, and we are using Petrified Blood, we are able to have permanent overleech on our character, meaning that we are getting the full damage reduction of that. I think it's like 10% less damage taken or like 12% less damage taken. Now, notably on this node, it says life recovery from non-instant leech is not applied. So if you wanted to have a little bit better recovery, which this build has good recovery anyways, you could go down here and take a leech mastery and go for the 10% of leeches instant, which will give you a little bit more instant leech. Could be good for a little bit better recovery if you really, really wanted it. I never felt like I needed it. But beyond that, when we are in Petrified Blood, that does mean that half of our health, or 55% of our health here because we have a life mastery, is going to be our new maximum of health. It prevents a certain percentage of the damage that we take, and then we take that damage over time. So the biggest downside to Petrified Blood is that extra damage that you take over time. So the way that we've dealt with that is that since we are near this brink of death node, regenerate 4% of life per second while in low life is huge. We've got just a bunch of other generic regeneration built into a lot of the things here. We are running vitality. I haven't even leveled up my vitality and my clarity and my precision even all the way yet, so I could be regenerating even more life than I am at the moment. But on top of that, I have decided to go with recoup. So the idea here is I've gotten enough recoup where any damage that I do take, I am recouping enough of it that it is essentially nullifying all of the negatives of Petrified Blood. That damage that I take over time is being recouped over 3 seconds because of the recovery mastery that we've got here. I've got fractured recoup on both of my rings, as well as recoup on basically every single one of my normal jewels. So the idea is this takes me up to, I think it's somewhere close to like 50 or some odd life recoup that's happening over 3 seconds. So this accounts for pretty much all of the damage that Petrified Blood would be doing to me is completely accounted for. So that keeps my health total going up. It makes it so that I have the DR from the permanent overleech, and Petrified Blood is essentially allowing me to like double, triple dip on my recovery. So the build feels quite a bit better now that I've gotten all of those defensive layers going. Beyond that, we are trying to scale as much armor as we can. I really don't have a lot. When we have a granite flask up, we're at like 78% in our book, but I think that comes closer to, I don't know, it's like 60% or something like that in PoB. I'm not really sure, but we have like a 10k max fizz hit, like 25-ish k max elemental hit, and a good amount of recovery. Now notably, the only avoidance that this build has is attack block. We have no way to avoid anything from spells, but the vast majority of spells are not really killing us instantly. This build doesn't really have good access to spell suppression. The spell suppression that we could get is very far on the right side of the tree, so it's not really reasonable that we'd be able to get it. On top of that, one cool thing about being a mace build is that we do have all damage with maces and scepters inflict chill, so it does slow bosses a decent amount, but that is the whole idea behind the defenses of this build. It is still a totem build. It is a build where you are not meant to be like right up in the enemy's face at all time, but I've made it relatively tanky, and I've given it a good amount of recovery that'll allow us to at least survive some hits. Now, you saw me fight the Maven, you saw me fight Cirrus, and most bosses are pretty comfortable. I've done pretty much all of the pinnacle bosses on this build. I was able to tank like some balls in the face from Searing Exarch. I didn't really have any problems with anything. I'm relatively experienced at those fights, but this is a good build for learning those fights because you can kind of just run around and dodge the abilities and let the totems do all the work for you. Now, one notable thing about this build is that it isn't really a good clear build, if I'm going to be honest with you. One thing that I would say is that if you really did want to take this build and try to clear with it, almost assuredly it would be better to just convert it into Consecrated Path. You would probably like swap out Multi-Strike for some other support, and you would swap in Consecrated Path instead of Volcanic Fissure, because that's going to mean that you're Fissure Totems will like jump around all over the place instead of, you know, just having to attack whatever's nearby. So we're going to run a random Dunes map. This is 72% more monster life, Vuln, Poison, Possessed, less flash charges. So just a random map that I pulled out of my stash. There's nothing special here. My Atlas tree is the end game Atlas tree that I used from a video probably a few days ago. I don't remember how long it was at this point, but it's got a bunch of random juice that can, you know, spawn randomly in it. And I'll show you what I mean by the clear is not amazing. It's passable, but it really genuinely isn't the best clear. Now, one big thing about this build that I do want to show you is that when you do have your Ancestral Protectors down, you can actually move relatively fast. So I'll show you here when we get rid of the Ancestral Protector buff, if I can get away from it. Our Leap Slam is, you know, not super fast by any means. However, when we got the Ancestral Protectors down, we kind of zoom with our Leap Slam, because they're giving me so much attack speed. Part of this is because of the Crown of Eyes enchant that I do have here, but we move relatively fast with that as long as we've got it up. Now, the damage is pretty solid. I mean, it's not, you know, at like 30, 40, 50 million or anything at this point, because as I've said, I've only spent a couple of divines here. But for the amount of money that I've spent and the fact that this is just like a totem build where I've kind of taken a decent amount of the damage away to try and scale a little bit of defenses here, it seems and feels like we're doing relatively well. Bleed is still kind of an issue. I don't have a source of bleed immunity, but I have tried to do some maps and clear some things and been mostly successful. I don't really have very many problems with anything like this here. Bossing, which is the main thing that I'm using this build for, is relatively comfortable. I haven't had any issues with bossing, maybe like 1 or 2 deaths here or there if I get really lazy and stop paying attention. But the clear is okay, the damage is pretty solid, and once we do get to a point where we can scale even more damage with what we're trying to do here, when we scale, you know, more than like 1300 strength, we should be able to get closer to like 2k strength later on. But you can kind of see that even when I'm taking damage here, you'll notice that it kind of just fills back up almost immediately, right? Like, I can't just sit there and tank, you know, the damage to the face, but most of the time my health bar just pops right back up to full almost instantly anytime that we take damage here. So it's got some pretty good recovery even in the face of, you know, random whatever these are, and the Harbingers or whatever it is. I don't even have my vitality leveled up like I said before, but we'll go and find the boss of the map, just so I can kind of show you what you're supposed to do whenever you do fight a boss. So I think he's over here. So the idea here behind fighting a boss is that you are just going to be placing your set of totems. Now, we do have a Vol Ancestral War Chief, and the way that our totem limit works is that we have to use this Vol Ancestral War Chief first. We're going to use Ancestral Protectors next, and then fill up our Volcanic Fissure totems. Oh, never mind. We're actually fighting him right away anyways, so we can't really do anything. I'm just going to have to show you. So that's the idea. I did exactly what I said there. The reason behind it is that because of our totem limit, we do have multiple totem support on both of our totems. However, if you see here where it says Vol Ancestral War Chief, it does have +1 to maximum number of summoned totems there. So to be able to have out all of our totems, we do have to summon a Vol Ancestral War Chief and then our Ancestral Protectors and then our 3 normal totem guys. Because if not, if we try to use our normal Ancestral War Chief, we'll spawn 2 of those, and then we'll spawn 2 of the Protectors, and then when we pop our 3 totems up, it takes out the first 2 totems that we summoned, meaning that we only get 1 type of buff, and that's not what we want. So the Vol Ancestral War Chief helps with that. But overall, it's been a pretty fun build so far. I have been enjoying the totem playstyle, even though it's a little bit weird for a totem build. The ancestral totems are kind of interesting because they do have this quirk where if you move too far away from them, they turn off. However, with enough totem activation range, it is actually pretty far that you can go. If you notice how far I can walk away and still have my Ancestral Protector buff, it's like if I put them over here and I walk this way, like the buff range is pretty large. I've still got it here. It's right here about is where the range is. So all the way over there, about a screen and a half, maybe 2 screens away, they are still active and they are still giving me the buff. Now, notably with your main ability on Earthbreaker support, you can get an alt quality here that will increase that. However, for our purposes, for what we're doing for right now, this seems to be plenty. And that is going to be it for the video. Now, remember that this isn't a build guide. There is a PoB linked down in the description, but keep in mind there will be a full build build guide coming probably sometime in the next couple of days. As we move into like mid-tier gear, we spend like 10, 20 divines on it, and then probably into higher tier gear where we spend like 50, maybe 100 divines on it. We'll see where we want to go with that. I know that I saw a tweet from Mathel that he's going to be playing replica Alberon's Warpath of a Volcanic Fissure build as well, so potentially the cost of the gear of that specific kind of gear is going to skyrocket, unfortunately. With me doing the build and him doing the build at the same time, I would say jump in and get the items as quickly as you can if you want to play this, because the cost of the items will most likely skyrocket if both of us are playing this and making content about it. So remember, boys, if you enjoy this content, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and stay safe out there in raid class, and I'll see you guys in the next video.